December 1st, 1934. A single gunshot echoed through the Smolny Institute in Leningrad. When the guards rushed inside, they found Sergei Mironovich Kirov, one of the most beloved leaders of the Soviet Union, lying face down in a pool of blood. Within hours, the killer was caught. Within days, he was executed. And within weeks, an entire nation began to disappear. The death of Kirov didn't just end a man's life. It opened a door that Joseph Stalin had been waiting to walk through. Because behind the shock, behind the grief, Stalin saw opportunity, the opportunity to turn one murder into justification for millions. Overnight, loyalty became suspicion, friendship became betrayal. And the Communist Party, once united under revolution, began to eat itself alive. The bullet that killed Kirov didn't just strike one man. It shattered the spine of the entire Soviet Union. This is the story of how a single assassination became the spark that lit the Great Purge, and how Joseph Stalin used death not as punishment, but as policy. Before he became a symbol of danger, Sergei Mironovich Kirov was a symbol of hope. Born in 1886 in Urzhum, a small Russian town, he rose from poverty to the upper ranks of the Bolshevik Revolution. A quiet man with a soldier's posture and a teacher's smile. During the Civil War, he fought for the Red Army. He was loyal, efficient, and, most importantly, useful. That's how he caught Stalin's eye. In the 1920s, Kirov became party secretary of Leningrad, a position that carried enormous weight. Factories, docks, millions of workers, all under his voice. And he used that voice carefully. He spoke less of terror and more of progress. He was the kind of communist the people could believe in. While famine and fear spread across the countryside, Kirov brought order to Leningrad. Even foreign observers noted that his city seemed calmer, more disciplined, more alive. Inside the Kremlin, that popularity drew attention. Joseph Stalin liked Kirov, at least that's what he said. He often called him Comrade Sergei. But behind that phrase was something else. Curiosity mixed with suspicion. Kirov didn't play politics. He wasn't building factions or challenging Moscow. But in Stalin's world, power wasn't always taken. It was sensed. And Stalin could feel Kirov's growing shadow. By 1933, whispers began to drift through party corridors. People spoke of Kirov as the man who could calm the storm. A few even dared to imagine, what if he succeeded Stalin one day? Stalin heard those whispers. He never forgot a voice. The stage was set, not for rivalry, but for something colder. By 1933, Stalin's Soviet Union was built on fear. Factories rose, cities expanded, and in the shadows, millions starved in silence. But inside the Communist Party, another kind of tension was forming. A whisper. A name, Sergei Mironovich Kirov, head of the Leningrad Party. Loyal Bolshevik, calm, approachable, the man workers actually admired. He was everything Stalin wasn't, open, confident, and trusted. To the people, Kirov was the hope that the revolution still had a heart, and that hope was dangerous. In January 1934, Moscow hosted the 17th Party Congress, the Congress of Victors, a celebration of progress. But behind the applause, unease. Delegates filled out secret ballots for the new Central Committee. Later archives would reveal a stunning detail. Hundreds of votes were cast against Stalin. Only a few, perhaps 3, opposed Kirov. Historians still debate the exact numbers, but the message was clear. The party no longer spoke with one voice, and Stalin heard that silence louder than any cheer. He said nothing publicly. He even smiled for photographs beside Kirov. But in private, his tone hardened. He began talking of enemies, traitors within. Paranoia moved quietly through the Kremlin corridors. Then, strange things began to happen. Kirov's bodyguards were reassigned. His security was weakened. Letters of threat were reported, but ignored. According to later Soviet investigators, the NKVD, Stalin's secret police, was unusually careless. Some historians believe it wasn't carelessness at all. In November 1934, Stalin invited Kirov to the Kremlin. No notes were kept, no witnesses. When Kirov returned to Leningrad, he seemed distracted. A colleague later recalled him saying quietly, "Stalin looked at me differently this time." He didn't know it yet, but his days were numbered. By the end of that month, a man named Leonid Nikolaev, a frustrated, unstable party member recently reinstated, was already stalking him through the Smolny Institute. What happened next would shake the entire Soviet Union. It was just after 4 p.m., December 1st, 1934. The Smolny Institute in Leningrad, once the heart of the revolution, was now the headquarters of the city's Communist Party. Sergei Kirov walked through its corridors alone. His bodyguard, Borisov, wasn't beside him. According to official reports, Borisov had fallen behind, delayed by routine paperwork. No one ever explained why. As Kirov turned the corner on the 3rd floor, a man stepped out from behind a column. Leonid Nikolaev, 30 years old, former party member, unemployed, obsessed with the idea that the party had betrayed him. He carried a small revolver, a Browning 7.65 millimeter. When Kirov approached, Nikolaev raised the gun. One shot. It entered behind Kirov's ear. Instant death. Panic spread through the building. Guards rushed in. Nikolaev tried to shoot himself, but failed. He was arrested on the spot. Within hours, Moscow was informed. Stalin's reaction was immediate and unusually personal. By midnight, his train was on its way to Leningrad. He arrived before dawn. Eyewitnesses recall that Stalin personally interrogated officials through the night. He demanded answers. How could Kirov's security fail? Why were the guards missing? How could an assassin walk into the party's fortress unnoticed? The next day, Kirov's bodyguard Borisov was being taken to testify. But before he reached the interrogation room, his truck crashed into a wall. He was killed instantly. No other injuries were reported. Some called it an accident. Others never believed it. Within a week, the investigation had a conclusion. Nikolaev had acted alone. He confessed, they said. He and a small terrorist group were executed almost immediately. No public trial, no open evidence. But the question that haunted history remains: was it really that simple? According to later Soviet defectors, Nikolaev had been under NKVD surveillance for months. His meetings were recorded, his movements tracked, and yet, somehow, he was allowed to walk into the Smolny Institute, twice, armed and unsearched. Many historians believe Stalin didn't order the murder directly. He didn't need to. He only needed to let it happen, and then use it. Within days, he signed a new decree, the Law of December 1st, 1934. It allowed swift execution for all terrorists and conspirators without appeal or delay. The legal door was opened. Through it, Stalin would soon drag an entire nation. Sergei Kirov's death became more than an assassination. It became a weapon, a reason, a story Stalin would tell the Soviet people to justify what came next. December 1934. Just days after Kirov's murder, Stalin returned to Moscow with more than grief. He returned with a new law and a new weapon. It was called the Law of December 1st, signed personally by Stalin. It allowed investigators to execute anyone accused of terrorist crimes within 10 days. No defense, no appeal, no delay. What began as an investigation into one assassination became a blueprint for terror. Dozens of men in Leningrad were arrested in the following days. Party officials, engineers, low-ranking workers. Many confessed under torture. All were shot. The NKVD, under Genrikh Yagoda, announced they had uncovered a massive anti-Soviet plot. According to the official story, Kirov's killer had been part of a secret network, the so-called Leningrad Center, controlled by enemies of the state. No evidence was ever shown. But Stalin didn't need proof. He needed names, and those names began to expand. By early 1935, arrests spread across the country. Thousands of former party members, officials who had worked with Kirov, and even people who simply admired him, were accused of complicity. They disappeared into the prisons of the NKVD. Some were sent to Siberia. Others never came back. In secret reports, Yagoda promised Stalin that the plot was being destroyed. But Stalin wasn't satisfied. He wanted bigger names. He began to speak of a second center, men who had once stood beside Lenin himself. Zinoviev, Kamenev, old Bolsheviks, revolutionaries from the very beginning. Now they were branded as conspirators, enemies. The men who, Stalin said, had inspired the murder of Kirov. In August 1936, the first of the great show trials began in Moscow. Zinoviev and Kamenev confessed publicly, their voices trembling, faces pale. They admitted to crimes they never committed. They begged for mercy. And then they were executed. The message was clear. Kirov's ghost had become the excuse for Stalin's cleansing of the entire revolution. Between 1936 and 1938, the Great Purge consumed the Soviet Union. Almost 700,000 people were executed. Millions more sent to gulags. Officers, teachers, scientists, anyone who could think independently. And it all began with one bullet in a quiet hallway in Leningrad. By the time it was over, Kirov's name was sacred. His portrait displayed everywhere, his story retold in every school. But his death had become Stalin's shield. the reason for every execution that followed. The man mourned as a martyr, was used as a weapon, and the friend Stalin claimed to honor became the excuse for his greatest crime. Sergei Kirov's death never truly ended. His name lived in speeches, statues, and slogans. But his story was rewritten by the man who gained most from it. Stalin turned mourning into a weapon. He spoke of betrayal, loyalty, vigilance. And each time he mentioned Kirov's name, another list of victims followed. For the Soviet people, the message was clear. Grieve Kirov, but never question who benefited from his death. By the end of the 1930s, almost everyone who once stood near Stalin or Kirov was gone, executed, erased, their names scratched out of photographs and files. Only one man's image remained untouched: Joseph Stalin. In the end, the bullet that killed Sergei Kirov did more than take a life. It gave birth to the Great Purge, and to the terror that defined a generation. Kirov may have been the first victim, but in Stalin's Soviet Union, no one was the last.